Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business-owning families. This conversation today represents progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business-owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship from the James E. Hughes Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful to Jay Hughes and his foundation, and Jay is joining us today, so thanks again, Jay. Last month, we featured Jay's book, The Cycle of the Gift, and before we begin today, I'm just going to share something real quick. Next month, we will have our friend from IMD, Professor Peter Vogel. He's got a new book coming out called The Family Office Navigator. He's going to join us on December 14th. And then also excited to announce the certificate in advising family enterprises. I know many of you on this call are advisors to family businesses. So if you're interested in that, feel free to shoot me an email and I can get you details on that. We also have the Generational Wealth Masterclass coming out soon. If you're interested in more information about that, again, send me an email. This masterclass covers all of the non-financial challenges that generational wealth and generational success creates. And now on to the star of the show. Allison, if you could spotlight Bernie. Today's guest on Authors at Drucker is Professor Bernie Jaworski. Usually we do weekends with Bernie, but today we're going to do Thursdays.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
He's the Drucker Chair of Management and Liberal Arts. He's the co-author of this book, Creating the Organization of the Future. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. He wrote that book with Virginia Chung, his co-author. And Bernie came to the Drucker School from Switzerland-based IMD, a highly regarded international business school. Bernie is a thought leader in the area of marketing and is highly cited in his academic publications, which he assures me that many, many people read.
If they can't sleep at night, then they read them. Yes.
One thing I love about Bernie is we will have fun in this conversation, and he will be practical. So, Bernie, thanks for joining us on Authors at Drucker.
It's great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it very much.
So, Bernie, your new book, Creating the Organization of the Future, why now and why is this book relevant today?
So I think there's three reasons. Number one is it's easy. It's not easy. It's actually hard to compete over a 5 or 10 or 15-year period as an organization. But to compete over a 50-year period is incredibly challenging. And Drucker called this kind of competing in two time periods. Today's academics call it ambidextrous organizations, but Drucker back in 1954 identified this issue of competing in two time periods. But that's increasingly difficult today, given the turmoil that we're experiencing in the broader environment and within our particular industries. So that's point number one. Point number two is it's about talent. The ability to kind of acquire talent and develop talent is increasingly challenging today. That's across the entire world. And so the issue that we're noting is that increasingly we're seeing younger folks that really want to be part of organizations that have a purpose, that have a mission, that are trying to have an impact in a positive way on society. And third is Drucker made the argument that if you really want everybody to be aligned in an organization, everybody needs to understand the mission, commit to the mission, and contribute to the mission. And so articulating a very clear mission is essential for an organization to compete kind of over time. And Drucker also noted that a very large percent of business failure was due to the fact that people had the incorrect mission or had a mission that was not specified enough. And that it was a major cause of business failure was a lack of clarity around what the mission is. That is, what business are we in, is an increasingly good question to be asking continually, according to Drucker. Those are the three reasons for the book.
Fantastic. Well, I think the audience that we have today, Bernie, as you know, are business owning families that are most of them are attempting to perpetuate themselves from one generation to the next. So I can't think of a more relevant topic than than competing in two time periods, because obviously we need to stay competitive today, but looking out into the future, how does the rising generation compete, with a new set of problems, with a new political landscape, with a new, set of assumptions. So,
it's funny on that note, Drucker argued that mission needs to be revisited on a continual basis. It's not something one does every 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 years. And that idea of kind of keeping it as a live idea and revisiting it on a continual basis. And that's a great conversation to have across generations. What business are we in? It's a profound question, but one that creates really good dialogue, right? For example, automotive makers right now, over the last 30 to 40 years, have said they're in the business of transportation. And now a lot of them are moving to say they're in the business of mobility. That's a really interesting shift, right? So they've been in the business of transportation for 40 years. They didn't want to say they're in the business of cars or trucks, which is appropriate. But what does it mean to be mobility, right? And I think Toyota is one of the leaders, in that space. So I think it's a really important issue for the family in multiple generations to have that conversation about what business we're in, because it can lead to really interesting dynamics around the nature of kind of what we're doing to offer, key benefits to individuals in society.
Okay, to make sure that our audience are not passive listeners, I need each of you to respond to that question. What business are you in? And go ahead and take a minute and write something down there. But I think it's a relevant question for us, and it changes over time, depending on, what we're actively doing, where we need to change. Okay, so and one other curiosity I have as I was working through the book is, creating the organization of the future. And then we talk about Confucius and Drucker. So those are names of the past. I mean, obviously their teachings are timeless, but why Drucker? Why Confucius? And help me with that.
So I don't know if Virginia's on the call, my co-author, who was one of my PhD students from several years ago. It was Virginia who initially wrote her dissertation on Confucianism and Drucker and the overlap of their philosophies, which then highlighted actually a fair amount of consistency in terms of thinking. So let me just make 3 points here, just so the individuals can see kind of the nature of how they think. Number one is Drucker talked about functioning society. For Drucker, functioning society was the essential thing that drove him over his career. It turns out you needed to have good leaders and managers and organizations to drive a functioning society, but Drucker was concerned about functioning society. Confucianism is concerned about harmonious society. Very, very similar concepts. The unit of analysis, though, for Drucker was organizations, and the unit of analysis for Confucian was families, both of which are kind of organizations, right, in some level, right? Now, Drucker was also very much concerned about having individuals who had integrity, had values, were humble, who were people that were really, in today's lingo, really service oriented in terms of their leadership style. But he was really concerned about not having charismatic leadership. He was about the person who showed up each day and could lead and drive change in the organization and could drive economic profitability. For Confucianism, same issue. It's all about character. It's all about virtues. It's all about values, right? And that was an essential element to how individuals could contribute overall to leading their family unit. And the third overlap was they were both about change. They're both about developing individuals. Individuals could not stand still. They needed to learn, to develop, and become better. And that was essential to Drucker's thinking about how organizations would improve. And it's essential for Confucianism to think about how families improved and how individuals could contribute better to the evolution of society at the time. So curiously enough, Dave, there's actually a fair amount of overlap in the thinking of these individuals. And for China, the issue is that it's so deeply ingrained. Confucianism is so deeply ingrained. People don't see it now. It's part of how they operate as a society. And so part of our job was to pull out some of the core principles of Confucianism to show how that set of principles actually related to the dominant management thinker of our times, which is Drucker, and to say there's a real consistency in terms of thinking about what these two individuals are talking about in order for society to function better, which is both their focal points, I think, at the end of the day.
Got it. Perfect. So in the first section of the book, you talk about mission, vision, and purpose. And perhaps we can take those one at a time and kind of pull those apart. And maybe let's start with mission. So why is mission so important, and how might we confirm that our company's mission is effective?
Yeah. So asking the question, Drucker had a point of view that said it's a very simple question. The mission answers the question, what business are we in? But we don't answer that question from a product and technology perspective. We answer that question from the standpoint of the underlying benefits that we're delivering. So a mission statement should never include the products or technology that you're selling. Hence why an automotive maker should not be saying we're in the business of producing automobiles and trucks, right? The question is, what's the benefit being provided? And as I mentioned earlier, for a number of decades, people thought it was transportation to get from A to B, and now it's moving more towards mobility. So the very first test, the very first criteria to evaluate your family mission statement is it focused on the products and technology delivered, or is it focused on the underlying customer benefit that you're delivering? That's point number one. There are 5 other points to evaluate your mission statement. The second is it should specify your target segment. What customers are you delivering that particular benefit to? Third is it should be 1 sentence or at most 2. Drucker said it needs to fit on a t-shirt. And I guess that's kind of a medium-sized t-shirt as opposed to XXX kind of t-shirt. So, and not front and back, just on the front, 1 sentence, right? Fourth is that it should be inspirational. People should read the mission and statement, man, I love to be part of that organization. That's where, that's really having an impact on people's lives. Fifth is Drucker called it grounded in the theory of the business. So the mission has to fit the industry structure's evolution and the evolution of the broader macro environment that we compete in. If the assumptions on which the business is held that were founded have changed, then we need to change our mission, right? So are there fundamental shifts in the industry structure in which we're competing in? And if there are, it may be time to revisit the mission. And finally, very, very important from a Drucker perspective, everybody needs to know the mission, articulate the mission, and ask themselves, can I contribute to the mission? Mm-hmm. If your employees cannot articulate the mission, you're not going to be able to get alignment in the best possible way. But not only know it, but ask themselves, what can I do to contribute to that mission? And that's Drucker's notion of contribution in his book, The Effective Executive, right? So every employee, if you want to get deep alignment, every single employee needs to be asking themselves, how do I contribute to the mission? But through every, there's a hierarchy. So I have to contribute to my mission through my boss, through my unit to the mission. So it's not like I'm directly contributing to the mission. I work through my boss. So how do I make my boss successful and how he or she is delivering against the mission? How do I make my unit successful in terms of how we're delivering against the mission? And then how do we deliver against the mission? So this alignment exercise is absolutely essential to unleashing the type of alignment that you want, as opposed to top-down command and control telling people. You need people to step up and say, what am I doing to deliver against that? And that's, of course, if you read Drucker's article on managing oneself, it's completely aligned with that perspective, which I could kind of go into also. But let me just stop there and say that's probably sufficient. Those 6 criteria, if your mission statement passes those 6 criteria, check the box, you're good. If it's not, I would encourage you as a team to start thinking about this question of what business we're in.
So, I mean, in your experience as a practitioner, are companies really investing time and energy in discovering, refining, and driving the mission? Or how are we doing?
I think the best companies are. I think the best companies really are thinking carefully about that. A good illustration for me would be somebody like Amgen. They see themselves in the business of creating therapies for grievous illness, right? They don't say, and by the way, they're focused on patients, right? So they make a choice that I'm going to focus on patients, put patients first. They focus on grievous illness, and they focus on therapies, meaning not particular drugs, but particular therapies that enable them to have some maneuverability within the field of, for example, oncology, right? So I like their mission statement. I like the mission statement of Disney. Disney's fundamentally, in one word, it's about storytelling. How they do storytelling varies across the various mediums they compete in, whether that's the park, whether that's ESPN, whether that's Disney Online. But the idea that it's about storytelling is really essential, right? It's boiled it down in some sense to one word. Now, their mission statement's probably about 35 words, but at the core is this notion of storytelling, right? It's very difficult for firms to come up with these. This is not an easy thing to do, but I think a lot of the leading firms have mission statements that are really, really precise and really clear. By the way, here's another test, Dave. If you look at a mission statement and you read it and you say, I know that firm, then you've got a pretty good mission statement. Most mission statements are fairly generic. A lot of mission statements are fairly generic. We're in the business of serving customers. That's really helpful. Who knew? We put the customer first. No, who's putting customers last, right? So so the ability to kind of say, if you give your mission statement and you say, I know exactly who that firm is, man, you've got a great mission statement. Very few people can pass that test, in addition to the other 6 that I noted here.
Okay, so that's mission. Let's move to vision.
Yeah.
The question here is, what does the world look like when we've accomplished our mission? What else can you say about mission, and how is it different? How is it different from vision? I'm sorry. How is mission and vision? How are those? How do they
Yeah. So now the business says, here's the business that we're in, right? We're in the business of storytelling. Disney's vision should be, in 7 or 8 years, what does the world look like if I've accomplished that mission of storytelling, right? What does the world look like, right? And that ability to articulate the end state, the end goal, is critical. So step number 1 is articulate the end state that you want. Number 2 is, like mission, it should be 1 sentence. It should be fairly tight. Third is, you want to use imagery-based language. So, for example, a watch on every hand is an interesting vision statement because you can visualize what that looks like. Fourth is, the vision has to inspire the workforce. It's like I read that vision. I say, man, I really want to be working for a company that does that. It's got to be challenging, yet at some level achievable. Even if it's going to take a long time to get there, it is achievable, and that's a bit of a tough one. And finally, it has to have some distinctness relative to competition, right? So let's take a look at Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity, I love their mission. It's a world where everybody has a decent place to live. A decent place to live, right? That's a really interesting choice of words. And it says a world, right? They're trying to cover a very wide swath. Now, it turns out at the time we wrote the book, Habitat for Humanity had served 46 million people globally in 70 countries. So this is a company that has actually really reached out and not achieved its vision, but has really had an impact on the way people live, right? We all know, many of us on the call probably know of Habitat for Humanity, right? Very clear, driven organization, very clear purpose, very clear vision. They know exactly where they're going. And it's distinctive, I think, in many ways in terms of what they're trying to do. So I think that's a really good test of those.
So we've got mission, we've got vision, and now we've got purpose. It feels like our university students are more interested in purpose today than they were 10 years ago. Talk to us a little bit about purpose.
So purpose and mission, Drucker wrote about purpose and mission together. If you read his work very carefully, we separated them because we felt they were different. We felt that purpose meant, what am I doing to help society function better? That's it. Now, at its core, don't forget, if you're a family business and you're working in Omaha and your impact is in Nebraska, that's your community. That's how you're helping society function. You're helping Omaha become a better community. Okay, so it may be some folks on the call are actually dealing globally with massive global businesses, but at the end of the day, the question is, what is the impact that you're having on society? So the very first criteria for me is, how do we help society globally or locally function better? The second issue for me is, a purpose has to touch mind and body. It has to really touch the heart of individuals. People have to kind of viscerally understand what our purpose is. Third is, it's energizing the workforce. Why employees love to come to work each day. And finally, you need to sometimes connect dots around societal impact. To your point, Dave, 25 years ago, very few companies would have a purpose statement in addition to their mission and vision. 25 years ago, you didn't see it. Today, I would guesstimate that probably 60 to 70% of Fortune 500 companies have a purpose statement in addition to a mission and vision statement. And so, even if you take a look at stalwart companies like Johnson and Johnson, their purpose answers the question of why does the firm exist, right? And that's kind of what we're getting at. And the reason we exist is to help society function. Their purpose is we blend heart, science, and ingenuity to change the trajectory of health for humanity. That's, and not only that, but J&J is trying to drive individual purpose to align with overall J&J purpose, right? So I'm joining J&J because I want to change the trajectory of health for humanity. And I want to ask myself, what am I trying to do individually to develop myself to help deliver against that, right? So people need to buy into the purpose and really kind of drink the Kool-Aid and say, that is where I want to go. That's who I am. And I think that's going back to my first point 30 minutes ago. I'm seeing just in a generation of talent that we're developing now as 20-year-olds, that group really wants to be on a purpose and mission-driven company. I'm generalizing across the segment, but increasingly, yeah, they're motivated by money, they're motivated by career, but they're motivated by broader things as a general rule. And so I think when you're talking about the war for talent, if you can have a purpose that's meaningful and really meaningful and really is driven by the family really fundamentally believes deep in their soul about their purpose, the organization is going to feel that. And I think it's going to increase the probability of hiring the right talent that aligns with the overall purpose.
I'm glad you brought that last part up because, everyone on the phone here is hiring talent, and maybe you can't compete from a salary perspective, but if your purpose is clear and you're attracting the right people, you may not have to compete with the very top salary if the story and if the mission and the vision and the purpose is really aligned with someone.
That's my argument, and I'm curious whether the audience buys into that. So we'll see as we get our commentary right as to whether in fact the folks are in agreement around how we're thinking about it. But I think that's the way I think about it.
Okay. Can we talk about culture for a second?
We can.
One of the most misquoted Peter Drucker quotes is culture eats structure for breakfast. I don't know that he ever said that, but
actually the misquote is culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Culture eats, that's the misquote.
Yeah, that's the misquote. I've looked in the Drucker archives. I can't find him stating that. He may have stated that, but I can't find that anywhere. And by the way, it's not really for those like Don and David and others that have taken Drucker. It doesn't sound like him. His articulation is so careful and so precise. It seems a little loose for me. So that's another reason why I'm not able to buy into it. Although, listen, it's been out there for 30 years as attributed to him, but it just doesn't feel like something he would say. So let me speak to the cultural issue. Now, Drucker called this esprit de corps when he was writing. So when Drucker identified it, he called it esprit de corps, but it was fundamentally in today's practice, it's called culture. Now, everybody on the Zoom call today, I'm sure, has their own view of culture because it's such a profound aspect of organizational life. But let me give you my definition. My definition is it's the practices, the workflows, values, and habits that shape how we actually work. And so it's the way that things are done around here. Some of culture is written down, some of culture is not written down, but it's the norms, the habits, the workflows of how things operate. And you get a feel for culture when you start walking around in a company and start observing daily practice, right? And one of the fundamental roles of the senior leadership team in a family business is shaping the culture of the organization. Obviously, one of the roles of the senior leadership family team is to develop the mission, vision, and purpose unambiguously, but also driving culture is an essential element of creating the environment. The way I think about it is culture and values set the guardrails for how it is that we achieve our mission, vision, and purpose, right? It sets the context for how we want to operate. But in the case of culture, it's how things are actually done, right? So you're observing things. It's not the ideal world. It's the world that's operating right now. And by the way, if you look at societies of cultures, the reason that culture has evolved the way it has in various societies is because somehow it worked. It led to good outcomes, right? Now, sometimes cultures need to change in order to kind of modify where we're going in the future. But there's a reason why a culture evolves, and it evolves because we've learned over time these things sort of work. Now, whether the culture needs to be modified, we all know cultural change is the most difficult thing to change in an organization. But an important starting point is to know that at some point in time, our culture worked very, very well. Now, whether it needs to be refined now, who knows? But there's a reason why we have the culture that we have in the organization. So let me articulate 5 considerations, actually 6 for culture.
Okay.
First off, it's not for everybody. That is, a very strong culture is one where there's a segment of the population that says, man, I can't wait to join that company. And there's a segment that looks at it and says, that'd be the worst place in the world ever to work, right?
So can we go to an example there? Like competitive. Think of a company that has a competitive culture.
Right.
Like
so
maybe it isn't for everyone.
Actually, that's really interesting. The one that's very, very competitive to me is Intel. But another one that's, I think, very competitive is also Netflix. Okay. Netflix makes it very explicit and says, we're not a family. We're more of a sports team, you know? In contrast, Costco, highly successful company, is much more of a family culture, much more nurturing, developing, career advancement, thinking about career pathing, thinking about helping people learn. Netflix says we don't care about that. We don't care about it. It's up to you to figure out your career path. It's up to you to figure out how you want to develop, right? Costco says no, we're going to invest. We're concerned about you individually, and we're going to invest. Netflix is concerned about results. If you produce results, just do whatever you want to do. I don't care about process. You can take 600 vacation days a year out of 350. You know, we don't really care what you do, but as long as you deliver the results, we're fine, right? So that's not Costco. Costco's about developing, nurturing, migrating people up the hierarchy and so forth, and developing people, having people learn, helping feel good about themselves. So point is, these are 2 markedly different cultures. I don't judge a culture as saying the culture as good or bad. I call them strong versus weak. Both Netflix and Costco have strong cultures. You want a strong culture, right? Now, whether it's good or bad, that's your call, right? In my case, I'd probably be very uncomfortable working at Netflix, but that's the way it is, right? So the point being is people make choices. I worked for a very small credit union at one point in Northern California, and the CEO interviewed every single person. And the CEO said to them, this is either going to be the best place you ever worked or the worst place you ever worked. And I think that's kind of an interesting. Now, I'm not saying we need that for our family business, but something like that it's choiceful, and it's like, oh, we have, this is the way we work around here, right? And by the way, the culture has to support the strategy, right? Culture has to support the strategy. So culture needs to feed into kind of what we're trying to accomplish as an organization. So culture doesn't exist out there. Culture is something we have that supports the overall strategy that we're pursuing. So number 1 is, going back to this issue, it's not a fit for everybody. Some people say it's a great place to work. Some people say it's not a good place to work. Second, the culture reflects how the company believes it will succeed and why. Helps the company, reflects how the company believes it will succeed and why. Third is, you can't have a culture that's abstract. You have to have a culture that's tied to the behaviors of individuals inside the organization. Right. So I need to see behaviors, not just these broader statements about norms. I want to see the behaviors that people engage in. If you have a culture and you say, here's the 7 elements of our culture, people should be able to visualize and say, wow, I can imagine what it'd be like to work for Netflix. I can imagine what it'd be to work for Costco. Right. Culture. Lots of times elements of culture have tension between some points of your culture. There's a tension between a culture, that's family oriented, and a culture that also at the same time really is driving results. There may be tensions there. That's okay. We need to articulate them and recognize them. And then finally, a culture can't be wishy-washy. Culture has to place bets, So, a good example would be, you say, listen, we're built to serve this segment of our audience. We're not built to serve another segment, right? That's making a bet. right? So I like to see cultures that are choiceful and make bets. So some of the characteristics, those are some of the characteristics of what I call the strong culture versus the weak culture. Again, I don't like to use the word good or bad because that's a judgment of that individual. I like to use the word strong versus weak.
So quick question here, Bernie. So let's go, I mean, thinking about family businesses in the first generation, oftentimes the culture definitely gets set by the founder
Yeah.
and what they believe in.
Yeah.
And I think there can be a culture crisis in the second and third generation where maybe it's not as clear, or maybe it's co-led.
Yeah.
Have you seen that or experienced that in companies you've consulted with? And I don't know if it's culture crisis, but it's culture shifts that seem to maybe get kind of stuck in the lurch.
Yeah, I mean, you raise, that's a great question. It's a great question. Let me articulate it this way. That's no different than any other company at some level, where you have a generation of leadership that's coming in, and then you have a generation of leadership that exists. And lots of times there's tension between those generations, because the next generation says, man, hey, the world's changed. We need to compete differently at some level. And the first generation of leadership is there saying, well, we were really successful over this 10 or 20 years running the machine this way. Yeah. And then the next generation steps in and says, well, wait a second, the world's changed. So the first dialogue has to happen around, tell me how the world's changed. Give me the evidence. I call that the point of view exercise. Okay. Tell me the 6 or 7 major trends that are reshaping our business. And let's agree upon those 6 or 7 major trends. Not the 500 trends. Anybody can identify 500 trends. I want to identify the 6 to 7 most important trends that are reshaping our business and reshaping our industry. And if the next generation of leadership and the current generation of leadership can agree upon those 7 trends, then that's going to get a lot of alignment around mission, vision, purpose, and strategy. But typically people jump into mission or jump into strategy or jump into culture before they establish these 6 or 7 key trends. And that's where a lot of it, you need to have a very aggressive and heartfelt and open debate about these 6 or 7 trends. It's essential to understanding where we're ultimately going to go with mission, vision, purpose, and essential to figure out where we're going to go with strategy and culture.
Well, I'll give you an example. So working with a second generation company, they've been on an acquisition binge. Okay. So they've acquired most of their competition, and they're at a size where they don't need to be looking to acquire. Their company is kind of different. It needs to evolve from out of gobbling up. It has to change, and so they're in a moment where their identity of growth through acquisition needs to change, because it just can't continue. There's no others to really gobble up. So anyways, it's just a kind of a live case that I'm in right now, where it's like, okay, who are we now that we're not, looking to acquire and grow through acquisition? It's kind of an interesting situation they're in.
Well, as you know, I mean, the fundamental predictor of success of M&A activity is the cultural fit between organization A and organization B. There's been a lot of literature on this issue, and that's, there's a lot of factors that determine it, success, but culture at the end of the day is going to determine the success of that M&A activity, of the fit. So I think it's kind of an interesting time. Again, what I would start with that company is I would try and get all the various groups together to talk about where they think the industry is going. Point number one. And given their size and who they are, I'd also ask the question of how can we shape the evolution of the industry? One of the things that I think we made a mistake doing is teaching Porter's 5 forces as industry attractiveness, where you analyze the 5 forces and you figure out, is this an attractive industry? For me, the 5 forces are things that you can manage, things that are pliable. Drucker actually had this point of view back in the 1950s. He said nothing could be more incorrect than firm needs to adapt to the environment. The firm actually needs to influence and shape the environment it competes in. So I think that firm, given the size, given where they're going, this issue of shaping the industry evolution in terms of buyer behavior, in terms of competitive dynamics, in terms of suppliers and so forth, new technology moving in, digitization, they should be in a shaping mindset as opposed to accepting the industry structure as is. But I think the issue for them at the starting point would be, go back to the figuring out what are the key trends, and then from that, figure out where do we want to go strategically.
Love it. Perfect. Well, I don't want to hog all of Bernie's time. So what I want to do now is open it up for questions. Again, I have lots more questions for Bernie if people don't chime in, but I would love for you to contribute your questions. You can either put those in the chat or raise your hand. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask Bernie one more question about, so in this book, you look at companies in China. You also look at companies in the US. When you look at mission, vision, purpose, is there anything that stood out to you as different just from a sheer cultural perspective?
It's a great question, Dave. And let me kind of give you my top of mind thoughts about that. A lot of the companies that we worked with in China that are growing rapidly have come into existence in the last 10, 20 years. They're not companies that have been around for 150 years, right?
Yeah.
And typically they're oftentimes product or technology led. Here's this really interesting new product. Here's this really interesting new technology. Or in the case of somebody like Alibaba and Tencent, here's this interesting technology platform play that I've got, right? And so the result is, I think they're a little bit behind the curve around these ideas of mission, vision, purpose. And I think they're evolving to a point where these are becoming more important. So one company we worked with was about a $350 million a year in revenue technology software company. And they came to us and said, we're very product driven. We have a great product. We have a roadmap for the product. And we kind of know where the product's going, but we don't really know who we are. Like, what's our mission? What's our purpose? What's the vision? Where do we want to go? How do we want to take? So we worked with them around those issues because they recognized that they had a great 10 or 15 year run and they had a great product roadmap, but they didn't ask the big questions about where is new competition going to come from? We've been very successful in China, staying in China. Do we have to move internationally? Are the big players coming into our marketplace that are global, and are they going to take share from us? Well, who are we? And we had to really hone in on what aspect of the industry that they compete in and where were they going to win, and then how to think about who they are given that context. And so it was a really refreshing exercise. So I would say in general, a little bit behind more developed economies in terms of where they are, but they're rapidly catching up. So that's kind of my general observation. Yeah. Is Virginia on the line out of curiosity? Because if she is, I would love to hear her perspective on that issue too.
I did not see her yet.
Okay. All right. That's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions for Bernie at the moment? If you do have one, you can go ahead and take yourself off mute or put it in the chat. And if not, I'm gonna keep firing away, Bernie. So I'd love to. Oh, okay. Cynthia, go ahead. Thank you for raising your hand.
Sure thing. So Bernie, I put our firm's very long mission statement into the chat, and I'm wondering if you have time after the other questions, if you could deconstruct it and critique it.
Oh, that's
you want him to do that publicly?
Publicly,
You're
man.
brave, Cynthia. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, let me find my chat. My button here for chat. I'm not quite sure. I just blew up the screen here a bit, and I've lost my overall. Dave, can you pull that up? I'm happy to do a diagnosis. I feel like it's for those folks that are a little bit more senior in the group. There was a wonderful PBS program called Click and Clack on TV automotive repair, and the authors. These are great MIT graduates that were graduates of the graduate schools at MIT, but ended up in the automotive repair business. And people would call in and say, "Hey, my car going up the hill is going beep beep beep, but when it goes down the hill, it goes whack whack whack. What's the problem?" And they would say, there's a when you step on the gas, does that have a problem? Yeah, it does. Okay, I think what your issue could be is it's your brake cylinder, or something. So so I'm happy real time to give feedback. Cynthia, are you telling me this is the mission statement, this paragraph? And you were a proud graduate of the Drucker School, and you're part of the administration.
I'm up for it.
So I'm like, hey, Cynthia, I'd like shame on you. First off, it's the first observation I've got here. All right. So let me ask this, Cynthia, going back to my basic statement, are we saying, so if you said, if you could only tell me in 2 words or in 3 words, what's the key benefit that these various firms that you're advising or consulting with are getting, what is it about the adverse human condition? And I think that's really the central point, right? Is that where you're kind of thinking about what's the issue here in terms of what benefit you're providing to the clients that you're serving?
Yeah, so these clients are usually taking on special interests and need to out-navigate them in order to become market leaders and have a positive effect on society.
And so give me an example of one. Give me an example of
right now I'm serving a client that has a digital health solution that delivers biomechanically validated musculoskeletal recovery regimens to patients anywhere in the world. And they're taking on orthopedic surgeons because they can reduce the number of surgeries by about 10x.
Okay, so, and by the way, with the context of this, of kind of what you're working on, is it, when you say adverse human conditions, obviously it's probably not just within the health sector, like the one you're working on, it could be across different sectors, or is it typically?
Yeah, we're focusing on healthcare, education, and social services as the points of leverage, and particularly where those 3 collide with tech enablement. Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry. So a couple of thoughts. Number one is I wouldn't worry about the technology the tech enablement part, even though it sounds central. I'd focus more higher order in terms of what is it that the benefit is that the customers are kind of getting from the engagement with you. And in some sense, you're trying to help them compete more effectively in a marketplace where the current solution is not the best solution for the particular end client or for society more generally, right? And you're offering a way to think about solutions that allows that particular company to not only hit their economic performance targets, but also kind of benefit broader society in a way that creates this sort of multi-stakeholder benefit that's beyond just what they're offering. So I would, what I just articulated, it would be something I would play with as kind of as the Play-Doh to play with. And I would eliminate all the 3 statements down below that you have here. I would focus really on the refinement of the very first statement as a way of thinking about you're helping people gain competitive advantage through advice and counsel to help improve healthcare outcomes in a way that benefits multiple stakeholders.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think the impact of saying it that way is someone's going to say, well, tell me more. That's kind of it, right?
And then you give the example.
Tell me more. Yeah.
Then you give the
examples. You're often running into it.
Right. Yeah. And then you can give the example. So, for example, if I say this is the business of storytelling, you say, wait, what does that mean? Let me tell you what ESPN does. Yeah. Let me tell you what Disneyland parks do. Let me tell you what Disney Channel does, right? So now you're on. Well, let me tell you about the Lion King, right? Now you're off and running, right? But it's motivated by the idea that there's got to be a compelling, emotionally laden story that connects to people. That's it, and then bam, now we can go into what we offer, right? In terms of product and services.
Very good. Thank you, Cynthia. I told you were brave.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Bernie is a truth teller and doesn't know anything different. Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions right now, or should I go back to my questions? Anyone else? Feel free to join us in the chat. Bernie, I want to go back to, you spend a lot of time in the book on principles, both Drucker principles and Confucius principles of Confucianism. And maybe we can just look at a few of those. Let me just share a couple of them that kind of stood out to me, and then maybe we can do some just comparing back and forth.
Can I do one small twist? I don't think we touched on values. I think we jumped from culture right into it. So let me just say a few things about values, and then we'll jump into the specific principles. And I'd love for you to test me on those. So choose ones that you want to really push me on. Okay.
Okay.
So Drucker believed that organizations need to be values led. he had these ideas back in the 50s and 60s. Man, I'll tell you, this is provocative, right? Because a lot of people say, why do I need values, right? Well, the values in some sets the boundaries on the ideal behaviors that we want to see in our organizations. And in a sense, they're really trying to create the environment that we want. By the way, values are one component part of culture, just so we know. Values is a subset of culture, okay? Now, so Drucker believed that this notion of being values-led was kind of essential for organizations, and that the employees need to read the statement of values and, in a sense, buy into the values, right? So the way that we got change to happen that was positive is through the concept of our values. Now, what's interesting for organizations is my observation, is they often have values that are kind of Me Too values and values that are distinctive to that particular organization. So let me be really clear about that. If you read a lot of value statements of Fortune 500 companies, they'll say, we are customer centered. We are team oriented. We value integrity, right? And my view is, I understand why you need to say this stuff, but it's sort of like, well, who
We
the hell
believe in
doesn't want
diversity.
teamwork, right? Yeah. So
We
right,
believe in
you want
diversity,
diversity,
yes.
right? I love it when people start talking about values that are unique to their company, right? So there's some like Workday, for example, has a value called fun. Why are we making work? Why don't we make work fun? So it doesn't mean that everything's fun, but some level of having a good time and making this enjoyable is actually kind of interesting, right? So I like the idea of values that have, and I get the idea we have to have some foundational values, but think of foundational values and think about firm-specific values. Firm-specific values that we need to drive our strategy and to drive the business we're in. So these are not values in general. These are values unique to our strategy and unique to where we want to take our company, right? So think about those 2 to 3 values that make you very distinctive and unique as part of your value statement.
Okay. We have a couple more questions coming in the chat. Atsushi, do you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question to Professor Jaworski?
Okay, thanks, Barney.
Yep.
And yeah, I have a question. I'm working in the really huge company, and sometimes manager misunderstand their and misinterpret mission and vision of the company, and so the subordinates like me always misunderstood what culture, what vision, what mission they have in my company. This problem is happened in really huge company, like my company in Japan. So I would like to know how to, implement or install mission vision of company to members precisely. I'm really curious about the question about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Time's up. I appreciate everybody coming to today's session. And
it was a hard question, Atsushi. That's why he says time is up.
Okay, so it's a situation, I think, Atsushi, where if you're 6 levels down in the company and the company doesn't have a really clear mission, vision, and purpose, there's unfortunately not. You can certainly tell your boss and kind of work up the hierarchy, but the probability that you're going to have the impact is probably small. But I think what you could do is, I think these concepts operate at different levels of the company. So if I'm in a unit that supports a division, and my unit is the marketing function that supports my unit, which delivers against the division, I can think about, hey guys, I'm the marketing unit within this division. What is our mission? What is our vision? What is our purpose? And so I think the ability to ask those questions at different levels is completely appropriate. So that's where I would start on your journey. And if all of a sudden you come up with something that's kind of interesting and people like it, what will happen in the organization is other people will look at it and say, hey, that's interesting. Maybe we should be doing that too. So you could see yourself as the genesis for some of the conversation in that particular area. By the way, this is very classic California. My gardeners come by with a blower now. So if you're hearing that in the background, that's what you're getting is the is the gardener with the blower. It's like I feel like it's highly correlated. Whenever I deliver webinars, the gardener shows up to blow the leaves. It's like a cause and effect. Bernie delivers webinar, gardener shows up, blows the leaves. This is not it.
We can't hear it. It's okay.
Okay, good.
So I think that's great advice. I think leading with curiosity, Atsushi, at the level that of the company that you're at, and leading with questions rather than pointing the finger of, hey, I don't think that we're really, living up to what the vision is or something like that. So I'm a big fan of leading with curiosity and questions, and then trying to find outcomes from that way. Great question. We have one other question from Elaine. Elaine, would you be willing to take yourself off mute and ask your question to Bernie?
Sure, absolutely. Professor, so excited to hear your provocative lecture here. I miss your marketing class. Anyway, just a long story short, Temu and TikTok have risen as a global company and very competitive in every country, most countries. So I really appreciate you mentioned the Confucius harmony principle that has been deeply rooted in every Chinese individual and every Chinese company. So my question for you is, regarding what's going on now, how do you even suggest them to blend the harmony into competition in nowadays?
Where the questions are getting harder as we go. I feel like I'm in some competition
That
where
was not a softball.
As we work our way through the questions, I keep asking more difficult questions. It's like a game show, right? Where I'm getting to the next level of the hierarchy. I'm getting asked more difficult questions. Okay. So let me provide a couple points, and then I'm going to make an observation. So first off, everybody on the phone probably knows, on the Zoom call knows, that the China economy is becoming more challenging over the last couple of years. So point number one is it's a challenging economic environment within China currently. The second issue that's obvious to everybody is the political tensions between China and the US and other parts of the world are also not a very positive situation that we're kind of operating in. And so you might be thinking, well, talking about Confucianism, talking about Drucker, why are we kind of going in that direction? I think this is actually a really interesting time. I think in times of enormous uncertainty and in times of lots of turbulence in the environment, these are the times where firms really need to commit to their mission. Who are we? What do we want to achieve? Where are we going? Right? These are the right times to be asking those questions. And I think for a lot of Chinese companies, the last thing they want to do is sit back and let the environment come at them. I think a lot of advice I would give to at least the companies I'm working for, which tend to be more mid-sized companies in China, is be aggressive and go after it. So if in fact their growth is stalled in China and now's the time for them to be doing some migration to various developed economies or other developing economies across the globe, let's isolate which ones you need to kind of move into, because yes, there may be some unfortunate relationships with the US right now, but there could be opportunities, for example, for you in South America and other regions. So the idea of being aggressive and leaning in as opposed to leaning back is certainly something I would advise companies to do. The other thing is that I think, Elaine, a lot of Chinese companies aren't really clear about Confucian. It's kind of like these norms of behaviors and culture that exist where people have not articulated them. And I think that Confucianism, as you probably know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you were not supposed to talk much about Confucianism in China. But today, Confucianism is actually the party is actually supporting more Confucianism thinking and approaches. And so I think the firm making these clear to the organization that can relate to that organization's values, the time is right to have those conversations. So those are a few ideas that I would have for Chinese companies, both competing in China as well as Chinese companies thinking about migrating to more global environments.
Well, you think of, I'll just add, you think of some of these companies that have had kind of meteoric rises because of a specific product. there's an opportunity for a company like that to say, okay, how does the company become bigger than the product? How do we solidify who we are, what we're doing to exist, not just because this product is still in favor, but who are we? And I think, yeah, that may differ from culture to culture, but any company that is, 10 years old or younger, they have a very young culture that's still existing. And if there's time spent on articulating what that is, what the mission is, what the purpose is, I don't think it's too late, especially because, no company is going to survive with one product, really. So anyways, any final comments there, Bernie? We are at our time, actually.
No, I would say the only other comment I would make would be that Virginia and I crafted the book as a kind of do-it-yourself book. So in the book, there's 2 chapters on how to do this. So if you're in a situation where you're like, you know what, I probably need to, this is interesting, I probably need to think about what my vision should be, or revisit my vision. If any of these ideas resonated, there's 2 chapters in the book that deal with how do you do it yourself. So if you were going to kind of go on a mission to kind of recreate these, I think the process for redoing mission, vision, and purpose is different than values and culture, which we don't have time to get into. But the point is, there's some how-to guidance in the book that people might find valuable. If the ideas resonated conceptually today, then there is some how-to guidance in the book that gives you some more specificity on how to go about doing it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bernie, for joining us today at Authors at Drucker. And just one final announcement that, again, Peter Vogel will be joining us next month about his book, Family Office Navigator. Looking forward to that conversation. I really appreciate each of you that have invested your time with Bernie and I today, and make it a great week. Take care, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernie.